Tracking the history of Apple's first hires is tricky, but these 10, with one bonus entry, are believed to have been assigned the first 10 payroll numbers, making them the original crew. You'd think Steve Jobs would be Apple employee number 1, but Apple's original CEO, Michael Scott, told Business Insider that he specifically didn't give the number 1 spot to Jobs because he thought it would be, quote, too much. Ouch. In 1985, as Apple was maturing, Jobs' unconventional leadership style was deemed by the company's board to be a poor fit, and he was sidelined. Jobs being Jobs, he abruptly left and forged his own path. He started Next Software, with unremarkable results, and bought Pixar, which did far, far better. By 1997, Apple was facing significant financial and technological hurdles, and Jobs was invited back. And by 2000, he was firmly in the driver's seat as CEO and ready to make more history.
Somebody's got to say, here's what we can do, and we can make it happen, and here's the level of thing we can ship in 16 months.
Jobs will forever be the face of Apple. Known for his familiar black turtleneck with Levi's and his rousing comeback story, Jobs was a foster child and college dropout who overcame plenty of hardship to co-found the tech giant and guide disruptive innovations like the iPhone. From all reports, Jobs could be tough to get along with, but there's no doubt his creative vision was at the heart of Apple's market dominance.
Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it.
Sadly, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003. Jobs dealt with the disease for nearly a decade before dying in 2011 at just 56 years old. Steve Jobs might have been the guy on stage, but as Apple employee number 1, Steve Wozniak was the technical genius who made things happen. The two celebrity disruptors went to the same high school, albeit years apart, then partnered on a 1971 Wozniak design called the Blue Box, a phone hacking device that allowed you to make long-distance calls for free.
A Blue Box was a little device that put special tones into anybody's phone, and those tones would connect you anywhere you wanted.
Woz had an internship at Hewlett-Packard, where he designed a microcomputer that didn't interest HP, but earned huge enthusiasm from Jobs. The dynamic duo then set up shop in the Jobs family garage, built the computer, and Apple was born. When Apple went public, Woz became a millionaire. However, big change was afoot, and by 1985, Woz had left the company. Though Woz never went back to Apple, he was never actually dropped from the company's payroll, and Woz has kept himself busy ever since. Apart from a series of board and advisory roles for various companies over the years, in 2009, he became the chief scientist of Fusion.io, which was involved in solid-state technology, and in 2020, got into cryptocurrency with the environmentally focused F-Force.
F-Force is all about using less energy to get as much done, and thereby basically making even companies more efficient.
Even the space industry benefited from Wozniak's skills. In 2021, he co-founded the aerospace company Privateer, which launched its first satellite in 2023. He's been a regular star on screen, too, making a cameo in Big Bang Theory, competing in Dancing with the Stars, and serving as a panelist on the Dragon's Den clone, Unicorn Hunters.
You're my 15th favorite technological visionary.
Ronald Wayne left Apple before they handed out payroll numbers, but he'll always be a big part of the company's history. Woz and Jobs were only 25 and 21, respectively, when Apple incorporated. So Wayne, then in his 40s, joined the fledgling company with the thought that his adult experience would guide them to success. For a 10% stake, Wayne drafted the company outline and even drew Apple's first logo. But here's the thing. While the two Steves were broke kids with nothing to lose, Wayne had plenty at stake, including his house, if the business went kaput.
And we figured, even if we crash and burn and lose everything, the experience will have been worth 10 times the cost.
With that in mind, Wayne sold his Apple shares for a mere $800 just 12 days after the company officially started up. Today, those shares would be worth billions. As if that wasn't painful enough, Wayne later sold off his original dusty Apple contract for $500, only for the same piece of paper to later be auctioned for $1.59 million. Now semi-retired, Wayne is an avid coin and stamp collector and the author of several books, including Adventures of an Apple Founder. Forever marked as Apple employee number 10, according to payroll, Gary P. Martin was and is a self-proclaimed startup company junkie. His addiction began when he joined Apple in 1977 as their first corporate controller. Back then, he had concerns that the young company would probably hit dirt. Lucky for him, he stayed on. Apple's unexpected success kept Martin on board until 1983, whereupon he joined the software startup Starstruck, a company involved with space travel. After that, Martin spent 8 years at another startup called Jacent Technologies, was vice president of finance at a disk drive maker called Mini Store Peripherals, followed by the same position for the then-hot technology firm 3DFX in the mid to late 90s. In the 21st century, Martin served on the board of Canadian technology company Leonovus, which produces cloud solutions for data storage, before retiring from the technology sector and moving into private investment. While not much is known about Sherry Livingston, it sounds like she was the glue that kept the first Apple crew together. Frequently cited as being Apple's right-hand woman, Livingston was the company's first secretary, which meant that she did just about everything you can imagine. According to Michael Moritz's Return to the Little Kingdom, Livingston described her role at the company as a bit nebulous, saying, "Everybody did a bit of everything. I didn't feel as though there were presidents and vice presidents. I felt as though we were all peers." Today, she keeps a low profile. She's now a grandmother, but little else is known about her current whereabouts, and she appears to be living the quiet life. Chris Espinosa was only 14 years old when he joined Apple. Either way, the dude was legitimately programming computers in Jobs' garage during the same years he was riding the Homestead High School bus, and he's generally regarded as being Apple's longest-serving employee.
Great ideas are not the exclusive providence of people with gray hair.
One of his primary duties was doing Apple computer demonstrations for the public at least twice a week, after the last school bell rang. Espinosa stayed with Apple through all of its highs and lows. These days, he works on special projects for Apple, and he's expected to maintain an active role in the company's future. Michael Scott was the guy who assigned Apple's payroll numbers, and the only reason he picked number 7 for himself was to make a humorous reference to badass secret agent 007, James Bond.
Bond. James Bond.
That said, Scott is a highly capable businessman who gave the young Steves enough adult supervision to turn Apple into a breakout hit. Brought onto the crew by backer Mike Markkula, Scott never actually went to the famous Apple garage, but he opened a bank account, supervised the manufacturing process, and structured the startup into a real company by doing all the boring adult tasks that don't make headlines, but are the secret ingredient to success. By 1981, Scott had succeeded in transforming Apple from a garage band of engineers to a publicly traded company. He moved on to engineering rockets, traveling the world, and bringing other sci-fi concepts to life, including funding the development of a real-life equivalent to the tricorder from Star Trek. Now that he's mostly retired, his pursuits are a bit more down-to-earth. He's a well-regarded expert on gemstones, and it's said that his collection rivals that of the world's royal families. Randy Wigginton, Apple employee number 6, was another one of the high school students working at Apple, and his tenure actually predates the garage, going all the way back to him and Wozniak writing code on a couch. While the fact that Wigginton balanced high school with working at Apple seems mind-blowing today, keep in mind that at the time, he was earning $250 an hour for some weird startup company that might flop at any second. Nobody was hopping up and down to drive this kid to his weird job, so Wigginton got up at 2:30 a.m. on school days to write code, which is admittedly quite impressive. He left the company in the 80s, claiming that post-Michael Scott and Steve Jobs, the new Apple had become, quote, very corporate and bureaucratic. In the years since, Wigginton has worked for a who's who of cultural tech giants, including PayPal, eBay, Google, and Chegg. From 2011 to 2023, he reported to Jack Dorsey, co-founder and CEO of Square, a guy whose style and approach often gets compared to Wigginton's former boss, Steve Jobs. And now, he describes himself as unemployed, according to his LinkedIn profile. Every team needs a rebel genius, and Apple had Rod Holt, a guy described by Cult of Mac as the chain-smoking Marxist engineer who masterminded the Apple II power supply. It was Holt's innovation in regard to the switching power supply that enabled Apple to create the lightweight computers that made them famous. Holt's other important duty was brewing the morning coffee, essential for a scrappy startup. Outside of Apple, Holt led a fascinating life. Born in Boston during the Great Depression, he became passionate about electronics as a teenager. Once operated his own motorcycle shop, was a passionate socialist, and worked for Atari, all before joining up with those crazy kids in the Apple garage. As Holt tells it, he was booted from Apple by the new management in the 1980s. He's kept a low profile since, but back in 2006, he expressed an interest in doing more sailing, or finding a teaching position involving Marx, Engels, mathematics, and logic studies. He's still around and attending events, and is estimated to have made $67 million from his Apple days. Bill Fernandez was recorded as Apple employee number 4, but he was technically the first person hired after the two Steves. In fact, Fernandez introduced the two Steves to each other, so he's responsible for one of the most monumental pairings in history.
I thought to myself, okay, this Steve is an electronic buddy, he's an electronics buddy, they'd probably like to meet each other.
At Apple, Fernandez worked with Rod Holt to turn Woz's computer prototype, which was, at the time, a bunch of circuitry shoved into a cardboard shoebox, into a reliable mass-market product. However, even as Apple hit the stratosphere, the humble, introverted Fernandez remained a mere technician, and he left Apple after just 18 months. From there, Fernandez embraced a life of adventure. He moved to Japan, got a brown belt in Aikido, honed his musical talents, and became a cultural ambassador. After a second stint at Apple, Fernandez again left the company to become a user interface or UI wizard for a series of companies, and from 2013 to 2016 was CEO of the uber-secretive startup Omnibiotics, which never went anywhere. Fernandez then struck out on his own as the official user experience architect for his aptly titled Bill Fernandez Design, providing an array of business and UI services to its clients, at least up until 2022. As of 2024, he appears to have retired. Armis Clifford Markkula Jr., better known as Mike, was one of the biggest players in Apple's history. From his early days as the older, weathered businessman working with the two young, inexperienced Steves, to his 1997 departure from the board, Markkula spent 2 decades guiding the company into the future.
He really was the business brains of Apple and guided our success, and he didn't get that much credit.
Ironically, when Jobs first approached the 32-year-old Markkula in the 1970s, he was already retired. But Markkula was so dazzled by the Apple II's potential that he made the original $250,000 investment, used his professional connections to get the startup going, and wrote the first business and marketing plans.
You could walk down the street in 1976 and talk to 100 people and say, would you like a personal computer? And they go, well, what's that?
Jobs' bitter 1985 ouster from the company created bad blood between the two, but Markkula was still on board and optimistic for Jobs' triumphant return in the 1990s. Since his retirement from Apple, Markkula has continued to invest in startups and has endowed the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And in 2023, the billionaire sold his 14,000-acre Californian ranch to be converted into a nature preserve.